very much, Leonor, for the invitation, and thank you also for this kind introduction. It's a pleasure for me to be taking part in this seminar, to be presenting a paper here, and I can only wish that we were actually meeting in person in Chile. So, as you already mentioned, my talk will be focused on to some of you, on a somewhat unusual theme. It will be focused on the phenomenology of pain, which I wish to link to the central theme of the seminar. And I want to link these two themes in a rather straightforward way, namely by asking, how is it that the pain of others is given to us? But now it seems to me that this question relies on a certain philosophical background, which I then will try to spell out to you philosophically. Let me share my screen with you. I have prepared a PowerPoint presentation. I hope you can all see it in front of you. And let us then begin. So there is a PowerPoint presentation, but at the same time, I have a paper ready, so I'll follow the paper. And the PowerPoint presentation should make it easier for you to follow me. So here is the book that Leonor already referred you to. I have recently published it, and much of what I will say in my talk will rely on what I have written in this book. In general, while doing research on this book, I came to the realization that there is a plethora of literature on pain, but there is very little written on pain as experience. And so, in effect, we know a great deal about various neurological mechanisms that are correlated with pain experience. We also know better than ever before how to weaken pain or even eliminate it. But we know very little about pain as experience. And this clarifies then the fundamental goal or ambition of phenomenology. The fundamental goal is precisely to address this question in a direct way of what pain as experience is. So in this recent book, I tried to develop a phenomenological conception of pain, which I develop as an alternative to other prevalent conceptions of pain in the literature. And so according to this prevalent conception, pain is an aversive bodily feeling with a distinct experiential quality, which can only be given in an original first-hand experience, either as a feeling sensation or as an emotion. Now, this conception, of course, entails a number of components, and it would not be possible to go into the details in the context of this presentation. But I want to stress two things. So the first thing is that this is a phenomenological conception of pain. And the second thing is that in what follows, I will rely on this conception while focusing on some of the aspects in it. Now, in contrast to purely emotional suffering, pain is an embodied experience. So it would be a category mistake for us to claim that one feels sadness in the abdomen or depression in one's lower back. But pain, by contrast to these emotions, is an embodied feeling, which we can only feel localized in our bodies. But then how are we to understand the embodied nature of pain experience? And it is when we raise this question that the phenomenological distinction between the lived body and the physical body, so Leib and Körper, becomes especially important. So we feel pain not in the body, understood neurophysiologically. We don't feel pain in Körper, but in the lived body, Leib, conceived phenomenologically. But now, what is the lived body conceived phenomenologically? Let me single out four components of this conception. So the lived body is the 0 point of orientation. It is the organ of the will and the seat of free movement. It is the expression of spirit. And finally, it is the bearer of localized sensations. So argues Husserl in the second volume of Ideas. So while relying on this fourfold conception of pain, I want to stress that when it comes to the lived body understood as a subject of pain, what is at stake is the fourth component. We feel pain in the lived body understood as the bearer of localized sensations. What is it that I want to focus on then? Well, in the science of pain, one commonly draws a distinction between three modes of pain: transient pain, acute, and chronic pain. So what I want to do is focus on chronic pain. And I also want to focus on human pain. So humans, of course, are not the only animals capable of living through the sensation of pain, but there are good reasons not to jump to conclusions, so to speak, that what applies to human pain also applies to pains lived through by other non-human animals. So against such a background then, in this lecture, I wish to focus on the following question. When I say that I'm in pain, what does the word I refer to? Who or what is this I that is in pain? Now, the nowadays dominant answer suggests that we identify the brain as a subject of pain. In what follows, I will identify the central reasons why this answer is misguided. And I will further show that as far as human pain is concerned, the person, rather than the brain, is the subject of pain. My goal, however, is not just that of replacing one answer with another. I am much more interested in the possibilities opened up by the proposed view. So once the person is identified as a subject of pain, it becomes possible to address the depersonalizing as well as repersonalizing nature of pain experience. And while there is some literature on pain as a depersonalizing experience, I could hardly find anything on pain, chronic pain, as a repersonalizing experience. So this is something then that I will touch upon in my talk. So here are those three different kinds of pain then. Not all human pains are depersonalizing and repersonalizing. So transient pains are felt only in the lived bodies, and they are devoid of genuinely personal significance. Pains are just pains when they unfold at a safe distance from the subject of experience. By contrast, some intense and long-lasting acute pains affect not only our lived bodies, they are depersonalizing in that they modify our relation to our bodies, to others, to the environment, and to ourselves. Chronic pain, as a rule, is depersonalizing in the above-mentioned ways. So chronic pains rob us of those characteristics that make up our personality. All chronic pains, I would suggest, are depersonalizing. But that still doesn't tell us what distinguishes chronic pain from other kinds of pain here spelled out. So in contrast to both transient and acute pains, chronic pains are not only depersonalizing, but also repersonalized. Now, the identification of the person as the subject of human pain, or more precisely, chronic pain, constitutes the phenomenological alternative to the neurological view, which identifies the subject of pain with the brain, conceived in accordance with the fundamental principles of neurophysiology. Now, I don't want to enter into a detailed analysis of such a standpoint. This would not be possible in this lecture, but let me briefly indicate what I take to be the three fundamental shortcomings of such a neurological conception. So the shortcomings are here on the PowerPoint slide. So first, it strikes me that this view is incoherent. Insofar as the brain is understood exclusively neurophysiologically, it cannot be identified as a subject of any feelings, including pain. Now, second, the assumption that all possible causes of pain are organic proscribes both the recognition and the treatment, of course, of psychogenic pain. So that kind of pain which does not derive from organic, but from purely psychic causes. And then there is a third shortcoming. This view underestimates pain's deeper effects upon the person. Boyd and Dyke emphasize this point especially strongly. So as he writes, the more violent a pain, the deeper it penetrates, affecting not merely the body self, but our actual personality as well. Nick Thacker more recently reiterated the significance of this insight. As he put it, I remain unconvinced, he says, that brains are sufficient for pain. I believe that the only entity sufficient for the experience and perception of pain is the person, unquote. Now, what are we to understand by the concept of the person? With regard to the philosophical literature on medicine and medical practice, Eric Cassell has observed that they both systematically suppress what is specifically personal, and so, at least in the context of healthcare, as he put it, we still do not know how to define a person. More recently, Dermot Moran has reiterated this very claim. As he puts it, the health sciences, and he has in mind person-centered medicine, nursing, personalistic psychiatry, geriatrics, end-of-life care, recognize the importance of persons, but with little theoretical underpinning. So this, to my mind, regrettable situation of which both authors speak can be remedied by turning back to Husserl's phenomenology, and specifically to this phenomenology of the person, as presented in such works as the second volume of the Ideas. Husserl's analysis of personhood relies on the insight that our ontological commitments, whatever they might be, are correlated with corresponding attitudes of consciousness. So some of the attitudes that we can take on, such say as the arithmetic or the aesthetic attitudes, are devised artificially. Thus, if a universal plague swept through this world and annihilated all beings capable of taking on a mathematical or an aesthetic attitude, this event would nullify all mathematical and aesthetic objectivities. This does not mean, however, that all attitudes are artificial. There is also what Husserl calls the natural attitude, that attitude in which we always already find ourselves. The concept of the natural attitude can be understood in two fundamentally different ways, either naturalistically or personalistically. According to Husserl, the naturalistic attitude arises as a modification of a more basic personalistic attitude. Husserl contends that what is given in the naturalistic attitude is not nature, but something more fundamentally contrary to nature. Husserl invites us to treat the naturalistic attitude as secondary when compared with the attitude that guides us when immersed in the affairs of our lives. As he puts it, the naturalistic attitude is subordinated to the personalistic, unquote. It is only in virtue of a certain self-forgetfulness that the naturalistic attitude establishes its own relative autonomy vis-a-vis the personalistic attitude. So in this regard, phenomenology is meant to perform a kind of mnemonic function. So what does it mean to be a person then? This concept refers to the subject of experience who sees the world from within a personalistic attitude. The person is the subject capable of taking on the first-person perspective. The person is the subject to whom things matter. The person is the subject of sensations, affections, thoughts, and a concrete agent in the socio-historical world. The person does not only perceive the world, but also is emotively touched by the world, as well as cognitive of it. The person is moved by affective tendencies, instincts, and a large variety of strivings, wishes, and volitions. The person is an embodied, self-conscious, social, historical, and engaged self. Husserl himself often spoke of the person in terms of a large variety of dependencies. The person is, he says, dependent on others, and not merely on individual persons, but on communities of persons, social institutions, the state, morals, the law, the church, and so on and so forth. Yet the person is not only a recipient, but also an active meaning-making being. And the meanings the person produces often become part and parcel of the intersubjective and socio-historical world. No less importantly, the person is a being who can intend values and who can orient her life in accordance with these values. Furthermore, the person is also actively engaged in the world, which means that the person is the subject of action. The person is the subject capable of acting responsibly in accordance with her choices and decisions. At the same time, the person always retains freedom from the world. She can enter the worlds, so to speak, of fantasy, memory, anticipation, and conceptually resettle, at least temporarily, in distant cultural and historical worlds. Husserl does not deny that we have the capacity to treat a human being theoretically as a thing, that is, as he puts it, as mere annex of natural objects, which are mere things and consequently take him as a mere thing, unquote. He further claims that, I quote him again, within certain limits, this is legitimate, unquote. But to this he adds that such a mode of theorizing can soon, I quote him again, become an injustice. The distinction between naturalistic and personalistic attitudes invites us to acknowledge that persons have a being properly their own. And from here, Husserl is led to an important conclusion. You have here an important passage that I want to stress. He says, he who sees everywhere only nature, nature in the sense of, and as it were, through the eyes of natural science, is precisely blind to the spiritual sphere, the special domain of the human sciences. Such a one does not see persons. The question concerning what it means to be human lies at the heart of the distinction, then, between the personalistic and the naturalistic attitudes. While recognizing the importance of the naturalistic attitude for various forms of theoretical reason, Husserl nonetheless invites us to concede that only the personalistic attitude is capable of preserving humanity as such, as Villers-Petit puts it. To be a person is to be an embodied subject of perceptual, cognitive, emotive, and practical acts. To be a person is to stand in an intentional relation to the surrounding world and in a communicative relation to others. The various acts that a person lives through build up the person's unique history, which to a large degree determines, so to speak, the person's style of existence. This history, taken along with the cognitive, emotive, and practical acts, colors the subject's intentional relation to the world in a particular atmosphere, which motivates the person to project particular plans into the future. So now we are in the position then to understand what it means to claim that the person is the subject of pain experience. Phenomenology of personhood outlined here is of philosophical importance for philosophy of pain, first and foremost because it enables us to conceptualize the depersonalizing and repersonalizing nature of chronic pain experience. And then to these themes, then I now turn, starting with chronic pain as depersonalization. So in psychiatry, the concept of depersonalization is employed as a technical term. It refers to the depersonalization syndrome, which the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the Mental Disorders conceptualizes as a feeling of detachment or estrangement from one's self. The syndrome is described as follows. The individual may feel like an automaton or as if he or she is living in a dream or a movie. There may be a sensation of being an outside observer of one's mental processes, one's body, or parts of one's body. Various types of sensory anesthesia, lack of effective response, and a sensation of lacking control of one's actions, including speech, are often present. Now, in the present context, I employ this concept of depersonalization in a somewhat different way. It is my thesis that chronic pain emerges in the field of experience as a rupture at the core of our personal existence, and it is this rupture then that justifies the characterization of chronic pain as depersonalization. Chronic pain is lived not merely as an assault on our bodies, but as an assault on our personality, in the words of Edmund Pellegrino, as a wounding of our humanity or our personhood, to turn back to the earlier section on the person. To determine this notion of pain as a rupture with greater precision, then, it is important to distinguish between four essential characteristics of chronic pain experience. So first of all, chronic pain disrupts the usual relation between the person and the body, a relation that in a painless body is marked by the body's subservience to the person. In the normal flow of experience, I first and foremost experience my body not as a material thing, but as an animate organism, so as alive. While itself remaining non-thematic and non-objective, my lived body is that very thing, so to speak, that enables me to access all other material things around me. Even acute pain belongs to the group of those bodily feelings which are marked by negativity and which stand out from the normal flow of experience, thereby unsettling the normal relation between the lived body and the person. Chronic pain marks the body's refusal to be identified with the person. Chronic pain patients often experience their own lived bodies with what the phenomenologically oriented anthropologist Byron Good has so appropriately called an irrational sense of betrayal. As he puts it, I think it's against me that I have an enemy. So one patient speaks about his own body. The body in pain is experienced as paradoxical. It retains a sense of being my own body. And yet, as patients struggling with chronic pain often point out, it has also become something alien, something that resists the self. So that's the first point. Now, second, by disrupting the usual relation between the self and the body, chronic pain also transforms the person's self-relation. Pain takes away from the person the capacity to accomplish some of the most basic activities. And in this way, it robs the person of self-confidence and self-reliance. So if you wonder why one needs a sense of bodily reliance, consider how its absence would affect the most basic daily activities, such as walking down the steps, carrying a cup of coffee to the table, or shaking someone's hand. As Eric Cassell puts it, I quote him, "We need to soar above our bodies to be whole and to grow. Having lost self-confidence and self-reliance, one feels crippled." I turn to the third point. Chronic pain disrupts the person's perceptual, affective, and conceptual relation to the world. The migraine makes it hard to contemplate our thoughts, and asthma attack forces us to forget our affective relation to others. Chronic pain transforms the body into a living wall that stands between the person and the surrounding world. In extreme cases, the body in pain becomes the one and only perceptual, affective, and conceptual object whose sheer magnitude blocks the person's access to any other object. And the fourth and last point. Chronic pain unsettles the person's relation with others. So that relates to empathy, of course. First of all, one must stress the isolating nature of pain experience. Being in principle non-shareable, pain introduces a breach between the person in pain and everyone else. Secondly, the experience of pain lies at the limits of understanding. And this point has been forcefully stressed in the anthropological studies of chronic pain. Here I have first and foremost in mind Arthur Kleinman, who famously puts it thus. He writes, "If there is a single experience shared by virtually all chronic pain patients, it is that at some point those around them come to question the authenticity of the patient's experience of pain." And we come across the very same insight in the works of another phenomenologically oriented anthropologist, Jan Jackson, who writes, "After a while, no one believes you." So runs the title of one of her papers. Thirdly, the person suffering from chronic pain becomes dependent upon others. So in short, then, to summarize, chronic pain is a rupture that unsettles four of our most fundamental relations: the relation between the self and the body, the person's self-relation, the relation to others, and the relation to the surrounding world. So pain is a depersonalizing experience in these four fundamental ways. At this point, let me turn to chronic pain as repersonalization. Despite its depersonalizing nature, chronic pain is also deeply personal experience. So as Drew Leder has insightfully remarked, I quote him, "Pain reorganizes our lived space and time, our relations with others and with ourselves." The concept of reorganization is key here. Besides disorganizing, pain also reorganizes lived spatial temporality and the fundamental relations that make up the core of our personal lives. According to Victor von Weizsäcker, it is a fundamental error to think of such experiences as pain as though they were mere sensations. Pain, and especially chronic pain, is not something that we merely live through, but something that we must respond to. Weizsäcker qualifies the experience of pain as the human exposure to evil. When faced with such afflictions as chronic pain, we cannot help but must respond, and the way we respond will prove to be constitutive in a twofold way. How shall I respond to pain? I cannot help but must choose a way, and the way I will choose will not only co-determine my experience of pain, but also form the person I will be. The responses to pain are diverse. They are bodily, they are emotive, they are cognitive. So first, with regard to bodily responses, consider how our muscles tighten and our posture changes in response to both chronic and acute pain. Second, with regard to emotive responses, consider how fear, panic, or anger can aggravate the experience of pain. With regard to cognitive responses, if I interpret my pain as an expression of an incurable disease, as a test, as a punishment, my cognitive responses will affect the manner in which I live my pain. So bodily, emotive, and cognitive responses then largely make up the painfulness of pain. These diverse responses to pain are not only co-constitutive of pain experience. As mentioned, they also repersonalize the self. While the depersonalizing nature of pain and illness have been addressed in phenological literature quite extensively, its repersonalizing dimensions are nowhere to be found. The way one chooses to react to pain will form the person one will be. In Weizsäcker's words, the goal of pain management lies in the overcoming of a separation between the person and her body. It lies in the reestablishment of a lost unity between myself and my own embodied existence. Yet, as Weizsäcker goes on to say, wherever pain passes by, it leaves an inerasable trace how it passed by. This trace of pain is the effect of its management that it has upon our own personhood. So recall my earlier claim then that pain is depersonalizing and that it unsettles four fundamental relations: the relation that the self has to the body, the relation that the self has to itself, the relation to others, and the relation to the world at large. The particular emotive and cognitive reactions to pain enable the subject of experience to form anew these four fundamental relations. So, if one gives oneself up to pain, or if one pits oneself against it, if one endures, tolerates, or enjoys pain, if one seeks pain or makes efforts to escape it, if one interprets it as a penalty or atonement or as a means of purification or correction, these diverse responses to pain enable one to establish a particular kind of relation to one's body, one's self, one's environment, and other selves. By constituting these four fundamental relations, the responses to pain form the person one becomes. So far, I have emphasized the projective nature of pain experience. The manner in which I respond to pain will form the person I will be. However, the responses to pain are also expressive of the person's past. These responses also rely upon the person I already am. So in this regard, Thomas Fuchs' research into the bodily memory of pain, Schmerzgedächtnis, is highly informative. According to Fuchs, a bodily reaction, which at first glance seems to be nothing more than a merely mechanical reflex, once subjected to a phenomenological analysis, proves to be a response determined by the body's pre-reflective memory. The body's past experiences largely determine the way the body responds to similar experiences in the future. Our bodily, emotive, and cognitive responses to pain rely upon our past experiences. Moreover, they also rely upon our interpretation of our experiences, which in their own turn rely and incorporate the experiences of others. So without understanding the person's history, then self-understanding, relation to others, lifelong goals, without recognizing the significance of the person's bodily, emotive, and cognitive responses to pain, one can only have a severely limited understanding of pain experience. Okay, now, pain is fundamentally a non-shareable experience. And I mean thereby that I cannot live through your pain, just as you cannot live through mine. Pain introduces a breach between what is my own and what is not my own. So if by impossibility I were to experience your pain, this would prove to be the most egoistic act imaginable, for it would amount to appropriating your body and rendering it my own. The experience of pain delivers the body in pain as my body. Pain individualizes. But when I come back home and see my dog wag his tail, I do not make an inference, but I directly see the joy he is experiencing. So also with others in pain. When overtaken by pain, in an extreme case, a person can lose the capacity to express her feelings in language and revert, as Elaine Scarry puts it, to animal-like sounds such as ah, ah, ah. Yet it is not by inference that I then conclude that the person making these sounds is in pain. Rather, the involuntary movements of the other's body and these strange animal-like sounds directly express the other's pain. In this sense, the other's pain is experience. It is not given in original experience, it is experienced through empathy. How do I experience the other through empathy? In one of his manuscripts, Husserl provides, to my mind, one of the clearest answers to this question. He writes, "The perception of another human is original perception with regard to his corporeality, yet it is first of all an empty presentification with respect to his alien subjectivity." That is, the body of the other is given here and now in direct intuition. It is something I can see or hear or touch. Through what Husserl elsewhere calls analogical apperception, this body is not given merely as corpor, but rather as live, as a lived body. This body directly expresses the pain it lives through, and this is what I see, the other in pain. But Husserl adds, empathy is not an original presentation, but a specific presentification. And this means I do not directly experience pain when I see the other in pain. I only presentify her pain. That is, I see the pain directly expressed in the other's body. Original experience, on the other hand, and direct seeing or direct intuiting, on the other hand, these should not be confused. Nor should we confuse this direct expression of the other's pain in her body with other modes of expression. We have at our disposal various languages of pain: autobiographic, medical, literary, scientific. Empathy, through which the other's pain is given to us, is a more basic phenomenon. These narratives of pain are grounded in empathy, not the other way round. And this means, if the other's pain could not be given through empathy, these narratives would lose all their credibility. There would just be no reason for us to take them seriously. While all languages of pain are grounded in empathy, some of them are structured in such a way that they implicitly presuppose empathy while explicitly abstracting from it. And such is the scientific language of pain, which underlies the medical treatment of pain. So consider in this regard the following anecdote. It is at the bottom of this PowerPoint slide. So it happened the other morning on rounds, as it often does, that while I was carefully ausculting the patient's chest, he began to ask me a question. Quiet, I said. I can't hear you while I'm listening. The physician hears the patient and immediately silences him so that he could hear him. So in virtue of this inherent absurdity, this anecdote brings to light that before it is anything else, pain is an experience, which is directly lived through by the patient and intuited by the physician by means of empathy. One would be right to observe that the physician has good reasons to ignore what the patient has to say. The physician aims to transform the experiential phenomenology of pain into a biological phenomenon, something that could be understood on the basis of a very specific language. And this makes sense. Insofar as she wants to be liberated from pain, the patient might also be interested in such a transformation. But this transformation cannot be the end of the story. If the task of the physician is to help the patient cope with her pain, then this naturalistic transformation should be just a detour and not the end goal. Otherwise, we will end up taking, as Husserl puts it in a different context, we'll end up taking for true being what is only a method. As S.K. Toons has argued in her The Meaning of Illness, the patient and the physician experience and conceptualize the patient's afflictions in fundamentally different ways. While the patient conceives of pain as a lived experience that affects her lived body, the physician thematizes it as a collection of physical signs and symptoms that disrupt the normal functioning of the patient's physical body. For this reason, far from representing the same reality for the patient and the physician, the phenomenon of pain represents two distinct realities. And so as to overcome this ontological gap, it is necessary that the physician explicitly attend to the lived experience when devising therapeutic goals. And this direct, explicit attention, of course, is only possible through empathy. Both the patient and the physician are motivated to bridge the gap between the personalistic and the naturalistic attitudes, without denying either the ontological primacy of the former or the therapeutic significance of the latter. The motivation for this transition is rooted in the sense that the body in pain is both my own and not my own, both personal and anonymous. On the one hand, the patient can only sense pain in her own body. But on the other hand, to sense pain is to experience one's own body as subject to laws and regulations that are not of one's own making. The patient thus understands her body as both personal and anonymous. Since the understanding entailed in the experiential phenomenology of pain leaves the phenomenon of pain both enigmatic and uncontrollable, the patient has good reasons to transition from the personalistic to the naturalistic attitude. But this does not, however, cancel out the fact that pain can only be given in direct, original experience. Just as the patient is motivated to transition forward from the personalistic to the naturalistic attitude, she is also motivated to transition backwards from the naturalistic attitude to the personalistic, for only on this basis can one evaluate the efficacy of medical treatment. What makes such transitions backwards and forwards possible is nothing other than the realization that the naturalistic conceptions of pain are called for modifications of pain experience, which can only be given from within the personalistic attitude. So something I had addressed earlier. So a brief conclusion then. In his critique of the functionalist accounts of consciousness, the Chilean biologist, neuroscientist, and philosopher Francisco Varela has insightfully remarked that the problem with the functionalists is not that they are incoherent, but rather that they are alienated from human life. Only putting human life back in will erase that absence, not some extra ingredient or profound theoretical X. This problem affects not only the available accounts of consciousness, but also all those approaches that answer the question, who is this I that is in pain, by pointing their fingers at the brain. According to the view that I tried to present to you here, Phenomenology of embodied personhood provides us with the much-needed alternative that allows us to put human life back into pain research. Thank you very much for your attention.